Hello, welcome back to the Arturia Jupiter-8 video series. We're doing another deep dive today, and today we're dealing with this sound, acid pulse. Let's hear it. Might sound like it's an arpeggio, but it's not. It's just a simple note. So we've got some digging to do to figure out how a single note is making a sound like that. It's pretty awesome. Let's start off with the Galaxy module. And you can see it's got single LFO doing some work. This time it's the X output that we're interested in, and so if we rotate it such that it's moving in the X direction, we'll be able to hear it. A little bit annoying that when it stops, every time this thing stops rotating, the strobing light kind of dies, but there it is. So everything in the X positive territory is having a positive modulation effect on the filter cutoff. That's that thing. Now periodically we're going to have to turn this off because it's just polluting every other aspect of the preset, this monstrous kind of dominant, very intense filter cutoff modulation that's being applied. Nothing going on in either the sequencer or the keyboard tabs, but over in the effects unit we've got double distortion. So this is distortion both before and after the filter unit. So we've got one insert there and another insert here, and together they combine to create that thick, fat, rich, distorted sound. Also bear in mind one of them has plus 12 dB of volume boost, so it's doing more than just distortion. It's also boosting the volume. Now let's take one of them out. So I'll take the first one out, and we get. Don't forget, a large part of this change is coming from the volume. So if we just pull that down to 0. So that's the first distortion all on its own. I really like that kind of a pulsing throb kind of thing going on. Fantastic. Let's play with that for a bit. No, mustn't get too carried away. Let's not run before we can walk. So let's just throw all of our changes away, get back to the basic sound. So now down in the main synth, we've got this LFO pulsing away pretty quickly, and can you see that it's tied to the host BPM? So we're currently operating at tempo times 2. The BPM of the current song is 90. So what this is doing, the LFO is doing a couple of things. Firstly, it's modulating the pulse width of Oscillator 1, which is generating a rectangle wave. We're going to have to come back to that later. There's too much other stuff going on for us to be able to hear this sound just at the moment, but bear with me. The other thing that the LFO is doing is applying a pretty intense modulation to the filter using its sawtooth shape. So this is going to be this kind of thing happening, 3 times a second? Dum. So the sawtooth is cutting through the filter frequency. Now when we took that away, there's all sorts of other stuff going on, and this is the point at which we have to throw the Galaxy away. Just for now, let's turn that off, because it's having too much of a polluting effect on the sound. So having thrown both the Galaxy and the LFO filter shaping away, what are we left with? Now what you're hearing there is actually 2 different effects, and one of them is the pulse width modulation of the VCO. But actually the dominant partner in that sound colouring is the fine tune knob. This 0.013 fine tune offset between the two oscillators is causing them, because they're operating at different different speeds, the oscillators are generating different pitches, those waves are crossing over each other, and because all of this other modulation is in the background, the LFO is still doing its thing. That's where you're getting a lot of this colour from. So let's pull the fine tune away and hear what effect that's having on the sound. Now you've got a much more consistent pulsing thing, and finally we get to turn the pulse width modulation down, and that is the pulse of the widening and narrowing of the width of oscillator 1's wave. This is a rectangular pulse wave. If I turn that off completely, just get that static tone. And now with that in mind, we bring the fine tune back in. Basically, it's very own modulation effect. The fine tune plus the interaction of the pulse width modulation is causing that kind of staccato sort of sound going on. That's really kind of rhythmical. It's very, very cool. While we've got this pretty straightforward sound, we can have a look at the envelopes. So we've got two envelopes. Envelope 2, as usual, is mapped to the VCA. When you press the note, you hear it. As soon as you let go, it more or less disappears immediately. 37 milliseconds is nothing really to talk of. Envelope 1 is interesting. This is another modulation source of the VCF. So what we're getting here is a filter sweep every time we hit a key. So if we take this envelope 1 modulation effect away, and now all we're left with is the fine tune and the pulse width modulation. While we've got this very simple kind of pulsing throb thing, let's bring the LFO's modulation back in. So that's the sawtooth of the LFO applying a filter cutoff, but don't forget that the filter cutoff starts so low anyway that that's why we're hearing that really kind of dull throb. We've pretty comprehensively butchered this sound at this point, so I'm going to throw all of those changes away and get back to our basic stock sound. Now those really intense resonant peaks are starting to show through with this really high resonance setting. And there's absolutely nothing stopping us turning the Galaxy on and seeing what happens when this thing starts to rotate. One really interesting thing about the Galaxy in saw mode is that it's only rotating in one direction. When we dealt with the Galaxy module, we dealt with sines and triangles, and you can see it forming the shape of a sine wave there and reaching the end of its journey and kind of heading back in the opposite direction. When you've got a sawtooth, it's basically only ever going one way. So the saw kind of heads down its ramp, and then when it gets to the bottom of the ramp, it jumps straight back up to the top again and carries on in the same direction. So the thing is constantly basically descending. So you remove the there and back again nature of the axe rotation. So if you want it to only travel in one direction, then set your shape to saw. We've also got a little bit of modulation on the performance section. We don't have any VCO stuff going on, but we do have a feed to the VCF. Now again, because there are so many inputs to the VCF, it's really difficult to hear. So I'll take the Galaxy away. I'll take this envelope feed away and the LFO mod. And now give it a little bit more. There we go. Now if I turn the modulation wheel up and down, so it's just providing an extra little bit of filter boost to the VCF. So how to make a sound like an arpeggio when it's not an arpeggio, all of that stuff is going on with a simple solo single note. Press one note on the keyboard. The interaction between the LFO, the fine tuning and the Galaxy module is just absolutely magnificent. All of those different waves competing with each other and creating this really interesting rhythmic kind of harmonic sound. Absolutely fantastic stuff. So I hope you enjoyed that episode, and if you did, please consider subscribing, hit notifications, and then you'll find out when the next episode comes out. And spoiler alert, it's going to be another preset deep dive because I love them. Thanks very much for watching. Hope to see you then.